from outside the 5. Mon looking that way. Got it! It's Rodgers! The Aggies win the game of the year!
Need 6. First down at the 1-yard line. Ewers on the move, throws it back. Helms got it. And Gunnar Helm dives to the end zone. And Texas, after a slow start, jumps on top.
And welcome everyone to Lone Star Yell Fight, where we're talking all things college football. Texas Aggies, Texas Longhorns, from the greatest country in these United States. All right, everybody, welcome to Lone Star Yell Fight. We have got our favorite Aggie here. Andy, the biggest question to be...
National Jersey Day.
I know. And I've got an Astros jersey over there. I'm going to throw it out. I just can't really wear that to Mass today, because there's also All Saints Day. So here we are. Although I'm using National Jersey Day as an excuse to buy a jersey. So, which is the intent, because like many holidays, it's a exercise in spending your money. Yeah, well, I'm pretty good at it, so I'm excited to keep that going.
How's the addition to your house going with all the jersey closet and hat rack?
We've decided just a new house is going to have to be the solution.
Be the easiest.
Yeah, where we don't know yet, but there'll be a new house. Is there a quarterback controversy in College Station right now?
Of course there is, because Connor Wegman has not lived up to the billing, and Marcel Reed has led us to 4 victories. Started 3 of those. It is what it is. Wegman is the higher rated recruit. He's the higher ranked. And I think if you put pen to paper, from a skill set standpoint, he is a better quarterback. The problem is it hasn't translated consistently on the field. He has days like LSU in 2022 where he looked fantastic, against Missouri this year where he looks fantastic, like a world beater. And then he has the first half of LSU 2024 where, admittedly, there wasn't a lot of help from his offensive line in that first half, and it wasn't a lot of help from his receivers, but he wasn't seeing things, or to put it a different way, he might have been seeing too much and not able, progressing through his reads so quickly that he wasn't letting things play out. And some of that's, you don't have protection, you get happy feet, you get worried about taking the hit or taking a loss on a sack. But for whatever reason, it just hasn't come together on a consistent basis for him. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we were sitting here saying how great he looked coming back from his, after the Missouri game. So it's a controversy because we just don't know what we're getting from Wegman. In the meantime, Marcel Reed has done everything he can do to make it a controversy, because he certainly has his limitations at this point in his development, but he's a guy that wins games. He doesn't turn over the ball. He makes positive plays. I think I read, and I may be a little bit off on this, but I think he's had less than 4 negative plays all year.
Wow. One of the things I noticed when watching him come in, because obviously I'm pretty familiar with quarterbacks who can run the zone read really well. Mm-hmm. And they were running the zone read really well. But I was telling you this the other day, I don't know that I've ever seen players and a coach look as instantly defeated as LSU did almost the minute that kid scored the first touchdown. You've got Brian Kelly just in a crouch looking down at the ground. You've got defensive players looking at each other, not knowing what to do. But did it surprise you that LSU did nothing to prepare for this guy? Because it's not like you didn't have any tape on this guy. Did it surprise you that they looked that clueless?
I don't know that they didn't prepare. I mean, I'm sure they prepared more for Wegman, but you have to account for the eventuality that you'd face a running quarterback. And I would think LSU, I think the defeat you saw, first of all, from LSU was this idea that Brian Kelly knows, for whatever reason, his team cannot defend a dual threat quarterback. We saw it against South Carolina earlier in the year. They only came back because that quarterback got hurt during that game. And they also had a lot of help from the SEC officiating, so we'll give them that. But I think Brian Kelly had the very real sudden realization that, oh, shit, we're in this again. And Brian Kelly is a very good regular season coach. I really don't know. And he showed it at Notre Dame. He's shown it so far at LSU. I don't know that he's a guy who's going to win a conference championship. I don't know that he's a guy who's going to win a playoff game because his teams do some things really well, but they are so woefully deficient consistently in other things. Even last year, they had a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback. Their defense was atrocious.
Right.
There's just something always missing. They don't run the ball real well this year. So it's an incomplete product in Baton Rouge right now. I wish Brian could have been on with us today to kind of talk about it a little bit. Or maybe not. Maybe we don't need Brian on here to talk about it. He's sad enough having to live in Yankee land and be sad for all his Yankee friends.
Again, I just don't know that I've ever seen that happen that quickly. Where do you sit though? Like, who do you want to start a quarterback? I mean, do you think it still needs to be Connor Wigman's job until he officially loses it, or do you go with the hot hand?
I mean, I am of the opinion that this is the biggest challenge that Mike Elko faces this year. He has a chance to do something special. We don't have a history of doing really well after we get off these starts, because I think since 2000, we've had this 7-1 type start 5 or 6 times, and only once did we not end up 8-4, 9-3 in that level. So this game against South Carolina is going to be tough, and that decision about who is your quarterback, who is your leader, do you find a way to play them both? I don't know the answer. My opinion is whoever helps us win is who I want to be playing. I am not. I honestly don't care if it's Wegman. I hope that he comes out, if he gets the start and plays lights out. But if he doesn't, I'm confident that we have a backup. If Elko decides that we're starting Marcel Reed this week, I hope Wegman stays involved, because in the SEC, you're literally one play away from having a different quarterback in the game. And we've seen it time and time again in College Station, as well as other outposts in the Southeastern Conference. It's something you have to be prepared for, and it's a luxury that we have 2 good quarterbacks.
Yeah,
I don't know that I care that one of them is not dramatically better than the other, but if you made me pick which one's better than the other right now, it's probably Marcel Reed.
Yeah, I think to your point though, at the end of the day, he's not a very big dude, and you're right. He's one hit away from being on the sidelines. You definitely need to keep Connor Wigman engaged in the game, right?
Yeah, and I think that's if you watch, I don't know if you've ever seen an episode of The Pulse, but it is a behind the scenes sort of documentary the A&M sports department, athletic department, puts out once a week. And if you watch some of the things that happened, Wegman was not happy about being pulled from the game. None of us would be happy about being pulled from the game, but he stayed engaged. He stayed talking to Marcel Reed. They showed some of those clips in this last episode of The Pulse. In the locker room afterwards, he wasn't hiding or sulking off in the corner. He was with his team. And that's the challenge for Elko is somebody is going to get disappointing news this weekend about what their role is for the weekend. But I think Marcel Reed has the right attitude. I assume Connor Wegman has the same attitude. As I've got to be ready regardless of what my Saturday starts off like.
Yeah, and I always come down to things like there's a reason, even though, because we're not at practices or whatever, but there's a reason why they kept turning to Connor Wigman as the starter, and I don't know that those reasons would have disappeared except for his inability to translate whatever that was into the game.
Yeah, and it's, fans and coaches have different data points that they go off of. We have a receiver, Moose Muhammad III, son of an NFL great, I don't know quite all time, but certainly one of the better receivers over the last 20 years. And when he gets in a game, he has 1 or 2 just eye-popping plays usually, but he practices like shit, allegedly. He doesn't know plays, all the playbook, and he's a senior. And if the ball's not coming to him, he checks out. So he doesn't play a lot. And fans get, well, all of that's worth it if he makes those 1 or 2 plays. And coaches want consistency. Coaches want to know what they're going to get play by play. And they want to know if the ball's not coming to him, he's going to block, and he's going to know what he's supposed to be doing and where he's supposed to be. And it's the same with quarterbacks. Mike Elko and his staff have seen enough through spring, through summer camp, August camp, and then through all the practices to see that the skill set of what they're trying to do is probably better with Connor Wegman. But if he doesn't perform, they have a decision to make. So yeah, I think he gets every opportunity, and it won't surprise me if he comes out and starts Saturday against South Carolina. But I think he's going to be on a pretty short leash if he does. And honestly, I don't think anybody knows who's starting outside of the A&M locker room right now. It'll get out probably later this afternoon or maybe sometime tomorrow morning. Certainly, you'll be able to tell. Certainly by 2 hours before the game, Twitter will start buzzing about, oh, this guy's taking more snaps with the ones.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you bringing up the wide receiver too, because one of the things that I've noticed with Texas's offense, it's so much more of that wide screen game, and all of those receivers for Texas blocks. And to your point, if you have a receiver that's just taking plays off, then the rest of your offense clutters or
Right.
stutters, excuse me, and you can't have that. You have to, like you said, be consistent.
Yeah, and that's the thing the coaches see, and then, frankly, their teammates see it as well. It's if you're on a football team, you're 24/7 playing football and around these guys. You know who's putting in the effort. You know the guys who are doing the right things, and the people who don't do the right things but keep getting playing time, it becomes demoralizing. And it's just like any other workplace. Why am I trying so hard? Why am I killing myself if this guy's going to get playing time and he's not doing anything he's supposed to be doing? And I think that's a big part of what happened with the Jimbo Fisher era is that guys got preferential treatment based on star ratings or based on how much their NIL deal was or whatever promises were made to those kids. And other guys were outperforming them but not getting the playing time. So far, I don't have any reason to believe that Mike Elko and his staff play that game. And I hope that they don't. And I hope they continue not to.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so as well. I think that it does seem like Mike Elko comes off a lot more blue collary to me, and therefore not necessarily going to fall into the same trap that Jimbo Fisher fell into as far as star ratings. And frankly, it's the same trap that Mac Brown fell into at the end of his Texas tenure of recruiting guys to be the starter as opposed to recruiting guys to compete. And therefore, sometimes in the case of Mac Brown, recruiting people that knowing they wouldn't compete with that player to make sure he had a chance to start.
Yeah, it was also interesting too that Mac Brown, at least from my perspective, those Texas teams created the recruiting environment we had up until probably 2 years ago when NIL and unlimited transfers changed all of that game. High school recruiting is important, but it is not the focus of a lot of programs as much anymore. But up until that point, you had Jeff Ketchum, you had Rivals, you had Orange Bloods, which I guess is Ketchum, but you had a few different entities that started ranking high school players and assigning the star rating, all this stuff.
And as early as like a sophomore, yeah.
And the problem became that Charlie Strong even said it when he was coach. If I offer this guy, he automatically becomes a 4 or 5 star. And it doesn't matter what his talent actually is. And so I think Mac Brown at the end of it, he'd recruit a guy because his coaches would make an evaluation. The recruiting agencies or ranking websites would go, well, Mac Brown's offering, he must be good. They give him more attention. He gets a higher star rating. That inflates the class. And that's not inherently bad until you're overranking guys just because of who's recruiting them. Right. And then you get into the situation of I've got to have star ratings to prove to my alumni that I'm recruiting well, which I think bit Tom Herman in the ass because, yeah, he was going to recruit safeties all day long, and they were all 5-star safeties, and that would drive his class through the roof from a ranking standpoint. But if you don't recruit offensive and defensive linemen, what does that get you? A bunch of guys who are hurt because DBs aren't supposed to be making all the tackles on your team.
Right. They did have a lot of safeties back in the day. Texas is off as far as going back to A&M and South Carolina. A&M's a 3-point favorite. ESPN has them a 54% chance of winning in their simulations. Is there anything that concerns you about the matchup? Because from a distance, it just seems like A&M's going to have a Saturday in the park and listening to some more Chicago on the way home.
Yeah, this is one of the 25 or 6-4 type games where South Carolina is a tough place to play. And I know that there's probably part of you that are rolling your eyes a little bit because this is not Lou Holt's speech. We had the same conversation about Vanderbilt last week. Vanderbilt is not historically a tough place to play. Vanderbilt did not play their best game. You guys kind of squeaked out with a 3-point win, although, the last touchdown was a garbage touchdown. But it's more of a slugfest than going into Kansas at the end of October. South Carolina's got a really good defense. They've got a couple of defensive ends that are probably going to be NFL picks, very solid secondary. So we're going to have to be able to run the ball up the middle. And, depending on the health of our offensive linemen, that may be more of a challenge than we would like to admit. We should be able to run the ball on them. But if we get into a game where we have to pass, that becomes, tricky, because if it's Connor Wegman, which Connor Wegman are we getting? Do we get the Missouri Connor Wegman? I'm pretty confident we win the game. If we get something less than that, or we're forced to run we can call it RPO all you want to. We were basically running the veer at LSU, and those guys just, a third person's running the ball. Shit.
Yeah. And again, I saw definitely a lot of that classic zone read where Reed held it into the held it in the running back's arms just long enough to see what was happening with the linebacker. I mean, again, it looked like 05 for me watching that happen.
I've got to believe that South Carolina is not going to be that bad against the run or against the zone read or whatever offense you want to call it. So it's a game that I really hope that we win. I think we're going to win, but it's concerning because it's a road game in the SEC. It's a night game. It is there's not a lot to do in Columbia, South Carolina, so the kids are going to be pumped. It'll be loud. You still have some Halloween leftovers because there'll still be Halloween parties going on 2 days after. So it's another test for Elko and his team. And, if they can stay physical and not turn the ball over and have some semblance of a passing game, I think we win. If one of those things isn't true, then it's going to be tough.
Looking at some wider college football stuff to finish up. Does Oregon at number 1 surprise you? Because to me, it just looks weird. And I guess I'm used to Oregon in the Pac-10 that will immediately, or Pac-12 or Pac-87 or Pac-2 that would immediately fold when they played anybody. But they played in a tougher schedule with the Big Ten than they did it with the Pac whatever. And here they are at number 1.
Yeah, I mean, they beat Ohio State, so they don't have to do much more than not lose, the rest of the way to win the conference. It'll be interesting to see if there's a rematch. For instance, I haven't looked real closely at the Big Ten standings, but and I don't even honestly know how they're going to pick their conference champion participants. But if there's a rematch with Ohio State, it'd be real interesting to see how that game goes, because Ohio State, I think, has better talent than Oregon, but Ryan Day has championship game problems. So that'll be interesting. I think Oregon's kind of in a perfect storm, though. They are a team that plays differently than the other Big Ten teams do historically. They present different challenges than most Big Ten teams do to Big Ten defense.
Yeah, the Big Ten being the traditional corn-fed sort of offense versus.
And there's some exceptions to that, but even Michigan last year winning a national championship was a very dominant run-heavy team who could throw the ball when they needed to. It wasn't what Oregon's doing to the rest of that league. It'll be interesting to see how it stands up to 2 rounds of playoffs potentially. Because I think they get that first round bye. I don't see any real stumbles for them the rest of the way, although, competition does pick up a little bit for them. But yeah, and I think, again, this is one of the things that realignment and NIL and unlimited transfers, you're seeing so much more parity, and you're seeing so many less perfect teams. A&M is not a perfect team by any means. We have a loss. Texas has some flaws. Alabama's got a host of problems. Georgia's got everybody's got something that they don't do well. I don't know that you're going to see dominant teams the way we've seen them in decades past that are A+ at every aspect of the game. There's going to be some teams that win national championships that are A- or B at one level, but they do other things well. So it's parity is here in college football, and I think it makes it a more entertaining game, to be real honest with you, unless you are Alabama, who is going to suffer from it.
The other Big Ten, I mean, it does seem like the big matchups this weekend are in the Big Ten, particularly like Ohio State, Penn State. Penn State's 7-0. Is this the year they finally, I guess, are we gonna call it the curse of child rape? I don't know what we're gonna call it, but do they feel real to you?
I mean, it's a huge test for James Franklin because he's
been there forever. How long can he stay and underperform?
I mean, I think he's a good coach. He's a coach that actually had Vanderbilt in a bowl game and playing well before he went to Penn State. He has certainly had his struggles. Penn State, to their credit, has stuck with him because I think he runs a clean program. They've been competitive. They're in general not, getting run out of stadiums on a Saturday during his tenure. And I think it's finally started to come together to him, but he's never made this step. He's never gone certainly this long with being undefeated, having a team that's undefeated going into the first week of November, and he certainly never survived November being a top 5 team. So he's got a lot to prove this weekend. Ohio State is obviously a very good opponent. I think that's probably the game to watch this weekend if you're, don't want to stay up and watch South Carolina football. But yeah, I think that's 2 heavyweights that are going at it, and it's going to be a big test, big proving match for James Franklin and his team.
Yeah, it is kind of a weird weekend in the sense that is the only, at least high-ranking matchup. Florida's got Georgia, but it's at home, so I cannot imagine Georgia's going to have much of a problem. I guess if we want to talk about matchups, we could talk about.
Well, it's actually in Jacksonville. They play neutral site for that game. It's the world's largest cocktail party. It's one of the It's one of the games that it may be in jeopardy depending on how the tradition or the standing matchups go once the SEC figures out what their schedule is long term.
Right.
But it's usually it's a rivalry, but it's not the kind of rivalry where you throw all records out the window and it's more the fans getting together and drinking a lot. And the football game becomes almost an afterthought, especially for the team that loses. That should be Florida, but it's going to be really interesting if Napier can get his team to somehow pull out a win, because for all intents and purposes, this is probably his last year. They have outperformed. And he'll be able to rely on the fact that, he lost my quarterback, so I'm playing a true freshman and blah, blah, blah. I don't know how much patience the Florida fan base or the Florida admin has with him anymore. But if they can beat Georgia in this game, I think that saves his job. So that adds another interesting dimension to what's going to happen in Jacksonville, besides the drunken disorderlies.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I want to go back to Texas, since obviously Texas is on a bye.
And since they're half of this show, we probably have to talk about them.
Well, it's just hard to talk about a team that's not playing this week.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what were your impressions of how you guys played in Nashville last week?
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about too, because to me, it felt like, for as much as I don't think you can watch a baseball game and determine interest on the side of players, to me, it's a team that they just sort of felt flat most of the game. And I don't really understand why. I felt like yours played better. Like you said, it really was a garbage touchdown in the end. Otherwise it would have been a double digit.
And as we've learned, a double digit win in the SEC. I mean, that's a great thing.
That's a great thing.
Doesn't matter the opponent or the venue. It's a good thing.
Well, and look, I mean, Vanderbilt clearly has been a much better team than they've been in the past. I mean, beyond the fact that they were ranked, they did beat Alabama. They played other teams close. I just felt like the team felt flat to me, and I don't know if that's me just looking at it from a doom and gloom standpoint or not.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge for Sark, because there's a lot of momentum when you're undefeated and you're the number 1 team in the country, and then when you fall a little bit short or fall flat, depending on your point of view, in your big matchup of the year, and that happened with Georgia. In Georgia, there were circumstances, there were issues, but Georgia won that game. Texas lost.
Yeah.
And so you have to get your players to believe that they are the same team that they were before that Georgia game, after that Georgia game. And I think it is. Should it be this way? No. Is it this way? Probably. You it's hard to get up to play Vanderbilt. It shouldn't be. It should be one of 12 opportunities that you have to go prove yourself or earn your future income or whatever.
That's a Mac Brown statement if I've ever heard one.
I mean,
but okay,
whatever players need to hear to motivate themselves, because there is, that level. But it looked to me like a team that had lost its motivation a little bit and started to doubt what they could do. Yeah, Ewers played better, but he played better against an inferior opponent. So I don't know how much you take against that.
Right.
You guys did not win because of effort. You won because of talent. I think is the way I watched that game.
That's 100% how I viewed it as well.
If you were slightly less talented and Pavia had been slightly better on last Saturday, you might be looking at a 3-point loss. Instead, you won by 3. So the challenge for Sark and your coaching staff, and honestly the leaders on your team, has to be, we are the team that was ranked number 1. We deserve to be there. We need to figure out how we get back to that level of effort, because I don't think you're wrong. I think the effort was lacking against Vanderbilt. They've got a week to regroup. They got to win so they can feel good about that. Florida is playing better, like we said, but it's a dead man walking situation over there. So
yeah, at least Florida comes in with name ID, right?
Yeah.
Like Texas, Florida sounds big in any other year.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is DJ Lagway, their freshman quarterback, is a Texas 5-star. He was the number 1 quarterback recruit last year, so he knows a lot of players on this Texas team. They know him. So there's some of that. I know that certainly motivated some of the A&M defensive players when we played Florida early in the year. And Florida's playing better than they were when we played them. So it's certainly a step up. I think it's a name recognition. I think your fans will be more excited about that game than they would be about, New Mexico State coming in or something like that. So that helps the environment. It's not hunting weekend. The deer season doesn't start next weekend, does it?
No, I don't think so.
That's not a thing that usually we play some shit opponent during deer season because nobody wants to watch us play, I hate to pick on them because New Mexico State, that's who we're playing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's your level of competition goes up a little bit each week for the next 3 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how Sark puts the BBs back in the box, so to speak, at least on the team level.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about Ewers as well, where he had another 2 picks, both of them on tipped balls, and I tend to obviously cut the quarterback a little bit more slack on a tip ball versus just making the wrong read. Although at some point you have to recognize you might need to throw it over the offensive line a little higher.
Yeah. We can get into the granular part of this. A tip ball that hits a receiver in the hands, that's not on the quarterback. A tip ball that hits the receiver on the helmet, that's on the quarterback.
Right.
So Ewers has to, I don't know. I don't pretend to know what's going on in his head. He looks like a guy that thinks too much right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he's worried for his job. I don't know if he's worried about his NFL, prospects for next year. I don't know if he's worried about Manning sitting behind, an inch behind him, and the fan base clamoring for him to get back in games. But he needs to somehow forget all that and just play football. He puts together really incredible quarters of football. Throughout his career, I can't think of more than 1 or 2 games where he's put 4 quarters of football together.
Yeah.
And that's I've talked about it in the past. He gets off to really slow starts. He needs to not do that next week against Florida. He needs to come out firing, because one way or the other, I think he's got 3 or 4 starts left, maybe 5 if things go really well for you guys, as the Texas quarterback. I don't see, even if he somehow comes back next year, which nobody thinks he will, that he holds off Manning for another year.
Yeah, I think the only reason why he comes back next year is if his projected draft stock plummets. But again, Manning's going to be the starting quarterback at Texas next year, no matter.
But I think even if Ewers is playing college football next year, I don't think it's at Texas, unless something really, really wacky happens, because I think Manning is going to be the guy next year. He doesn't have the excuse of being a freshman, redshirt or otherwise next year. He's had game competition. He's seen the game speed. So it's not and you're not going into your first year of the SEC. So the need to have a 3-year starting quarterback has lessened.
Yeah. And it's just, it's one of those things, man, where Texas has 4 games left. They are the closest game as far as ESPN's projections go is the A&M game, in which they have a 70% chance of winning that game. Everything else is in the 90s, which I know obviously this is not a computer. They're not robots, but it does tell you that as long as they come out with some degree of focus, that they should be expected to win the rest of the games on their schedule.
Yep. That is what the ESPN FPI says.
So we just have to hope that happens. I don't know. It's a bizarre thing.
Yeah, I think that being favored is a blessing and a curse, because there is the danger of believing your own hype a little bit. And while it's good for Texas that they beat Vanderbilt with not the best effort, the reality is that they're going to have to start making that effort at some point. And if you think effort's a switch kind of thing, I think you get surprised, because when you get used to not making effort and still winning, it's hard to just decide, now I'm going to try.
It's interesting you bring that up too, because there were definitely teams, again, going back to the Mac Brown era, where they were so good for so long that you definitely had that whole, we can just roll the helmet out and going to win. It does seem like that entitlement had crept into a Charlie Strong team and to a Tom Herman team. But that was an unearned feeling. Like, they never were world beaters in either of those two coaches' tenures. So the idea that I think we could just show up, we've got Texas on our chest and win, seems unearned. And I hope it's something that they've driven out of the program, at least so far.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the test. There is, I think if you look at kind of the coaching careers for most coaches on a line chart, you can really see recruiting is good the first couple of years because you can sell the future and you get your guys in by year 4 and it's completely your team in general. And that's changed a little bit with the transfer rules. But in general, I think that still works. But by year 4, you either have guys really bought in or guys who are waiting for the next thing to happen.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that Texas players are one way or the other. I wouldn't claim to have any insight into that. But I think you've got some thought amongst the team. I would think this exists of, are we as good as our press clippings say we are? And it's weird because the thing that gets you over that hump is the effort. The talent's there. Nobody's arguing Texas's talent. It's going to be, can you put consistent effort in and not make stupid mistakes? I mean, if you go over and Ewers throws 3 picks against Florida, you might lose that game.
Yeah.
Shouldn't. It's an 11 o'clock game. It's obviously so unimportant to the SEC. They're putting it in a 11 o'clock spot. So they think it's probably going to be a blowout from a TV perspective. But the players can't go into that arena and say, oh, it's an 11 o'clock game. They think we're going to win.
Yeah. As we wrap up, speaking of just the effort against Vanderbilt felt like a lot of the efforts we saw Texas versus K-State a lot of those years, where they just didn't have enough energy. And before they knew it, K-State was hanging around. And that's kind of the vibe I got from that game.
Yeah. And honestly, if Vanderbilt had K-State's talent, Vanderbilt is not a talented team outside of a couple of positions. But if Vanderbilt had K-State's talent, I don't know that you guys would have won that game the way you played. And that's because talent, we can talk coachy stuff all you want, but talent only takes you so far. It allowed you to win that game. Should have won that game by 10, ended up by 3. I think that could have flipped pretty easily if you had, we're facing a better opponent. Florida is not a good team, but they're a better opponent. You're at home. It's a little bit different. But you've got 4 games culminating with whatever the FBI says. I don't know that Texas has a 70% chance of winning that game based on anything, because you're going to have 2 teams that are very interested in beating one another. And one team, hopefully, if they both come into those games 11-1 and they're playing for a spot in the SEC championship, whichever team has consistently put that effort in, is used to putting that effort in for 4 quarters, I think that's the team that ultimately wins that game. So Texas has 3 or 4 weeks to get that right before you
Yeah, no, I mean, you're
song lyrics to pop
Totally it. I think you've nailed it. And I think it's going to be a long season. It should be a fun rest of the season if both teams play to their level of talent. Then they should be able to have a meaningful game after Thanksgiving.
The end of Texas as we know it, the state, not the school, is still on the table where our two schools end up playing each other 3 times.
I know.
That's still a thing that could happen.
To go from not playing for 11 years to 3 times in 3 weeks. It's going to be fantastic. All right. Well, we'll catch up next week. Andy, good luck this weekend. South Carolina. I see A&M winning by 10. I have a feeling Connor Wigman's going to start though, man. And I think he'll bounce back.
From your lips.
We'll see. All right, everybody. We'll see you all next week. For Andy, I'll say hook 'em horns. He's got a
gig 'em.
All right, man. Hey, have a safe